Every Inauguration Day is a grand demonstration of our great democracy.
The peaceful transfer of power is something that maybe we take for granted.
If America didn't have a smooth transition of power, you might see tanks on the streets.
But more than that, it's a major miracle of moving.
It's like anyone's moving, right? Except we're setting up a new government.
You see that change happen really before your eyes.
Did not sleep for 2 days. I had a sleeping bag in my office.
This is the inside story of what really happens at the White House while the rest of the country is watching the parade.
Our transition period was going to be the shortest ever. We were way behind already.
A race against time for the White House staff. The greatest logistical triumph our nation can muster, short of war.
One of the offices looked like a bomb had gone off in it.
I understand there was some yelling involved.
And I actually said, don't let him get in the car until I tell you to.
Raise your right hand and please repeat after me.
I, John Fitzgerald Kennedy.
I, William Jefferson Clinton.
Inauguration Day is our nation's most solemn ceremony. The peaceful transition of power on the steps of the U.S. Capitol. A vision of calm for the eyes of citizens and the world. But on the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue, chaos. From the moment the outgoing president leaves the White House, a hand-picked team of 93 residential staff, Presidential Secret Service detail, and a small team from the West Wing are tasked with the near impossible to flip living quarters and the principal offices in the West Wing in less than 6 hours. The staff can't start the move until the outgoing president leaves the White House just before noon to see his successor sworn in. And they have to be completely done by the time the incoming president walks in from the inaugural parade.
Each person on the staff has some part of the house to deal with.
The new First Family's living quarters need to be set up down to every last picture on the wall and socks in their drawers. And then there's the establishment of the new president's West Wing offices.
They're so busy, so many things are happening.
Yet no matter how crazy, there is absolutely no room for error. The president needs to be ready at any moment to serve the country.
All the things that are going on throughout the world, they don't cease for Inauguration Day. We have to transfer very quickly.
It's a fundamental issue of national security.
We are a country of laws. There are no coups here.
If America didn't have a smooth transition of power, you might see tanks on the streets. But we routinely transfer power peacefully.
But before these teams can tackle this monumental task, they have to hurry up and wait. It's 4 a.m. on Inauguration Day, and the day has begun for the White House staff.
On the day of inauguration, you know exactly what needs to come into the house and what needs to go out. But you can't move until the sitting president leaves.
The chief usher orchestrates the day's events.
Supposed to be down there when that goes on.
Former chief usher Gary Walters worked in the White House for 5 transitions and supervised 3 of them.
There's so much that we have to do. We really try and maintain that the president, when he gets up on inaugural morning, is still in his home. But by making the choice to wait, it's even more difficult.
By 6 a.m., the outgoing commander-in-chief is up after his last night in the White House. In 6 hours, he'll be a private citizen once again. But until noon, he is still the president. At 7:45 a.m., the departing president receives his last briefing from his national security team, bringing him up to date on all the current threats against the United States, both foreign and domestic.
What else we got?
Moments later, that same team walks across Pennsylvania Avenue to Blair House, where the president-elect is staying, to give him his first briefing. In that meeting, he is briefed on the most powerful weapon in the world, the so-called nuclear football, a portable device that will travel with him everywhere he goes throughout his presidency and enable him to unleash an immediate nuclear attack anytime, anywhere in the world. But he can't use it until noon.
from that first day. Working in the White House, you know, everything's a crisis.
At 9:55 a.m., with just over 2 hours until the inauguration, the White House staff is assembling into battalions, ready for the assault.
We would divide them up into groups. Everybody was assigned a very specific job. There were people that were packers, unpackers, placers. Everybody had a job to do.
But the old boss hasn't left yet, and he has to host one last official guest, his successor. And the staff can find themselves in the awkward position of having to do a little diplomacy in addition to everything else. Former head of the visitor's office, Melinda Bates, remembers the Bill Clinton to George W. Bush transition.
The Reagans and the Bushes, as an older generation, were always on time for things. Things ran exactly as they were expected to do. Nothing like that happens with the Clintons.
When it was President Clinton's turn to hand over the keys, he was late. Very late.
He was supposed to be over in the North Portico, ready to greet the President-elect and Mrs. Bush, and he wasn't there.
Former Chief of Staff John Podesta worked alongside President Clinton throughout his administration.
President Clinton was kind of sentimental at that moment. He was packing up his belongings from the Oval Office. He thought of it as a tremendous privilege to be able to operate on behalf of the American people. And I think wanted to do that till the very last minute.
Yet after the most controversial election battle in American history, it was critical that President Clinton and the president-elect show their unity in front of the press.
As far as we're concerned, Gore is our president and not George W. Bush.
When I was in Florida for those 37 days, I would get calls from foreign ministers saying, hey, what's going on with you Americans? Can't you even run an election?
It was up to Chief Usher Gary Walters to prevent a public relations catastrophe on the world stage.
I got a call from President Bush's staff over in Blair House that they were ready to pull across the street and drive in, and I actually said, don't let him get in the car until I tell you to. He said, do you know how difficult that is? So I was frantically trying to find out where President Clinton was. I eventually located President Clinton over in the Oval Office, and I'm giving him orders that he better come right now. So very rapidly, President Clinton showed up. Later, I thought to myself, my goodness, a very odd circumstance for me as the chief usher.
It is now day 75 for the hostages in Tehran.
In 1981, it was more than sentimentality that kept the sitting president at his desk until the last possible moment. The Iran hostage crisis that had marred Jimmy Carter's presidency was still underway. The hostages still held in Tehran after more than 440 days, but the Carter administration was determined to get them released before leaving office.
That was a very traumatic transition because of the Iran hostage situation.
I know from a staff point of view, and Carter to Reagan was probably the most challenging.
More than 50 Americans had been captured and held hostage by Islamic revolutionaries to protest America's interference in Iranian politics.
President Carter worked tirelessly during the hostage crisis.
With the lives of these Americans hanging in the balance, Carter and his staff worked around the clock for months to secure the release of the hostages. Negotiations continued through the final night of his presidency.
I was an assistant usher at the time, working the evening shift. It was in the middle of the night. And I can remember taking food and beverage and pillows and blankets, and of course that went up to inaugural day.
Coming to work on Inauguration Day of 1981, President Carter was still in the Oval Office.
By 9 a.m., the Oval Office should have been cleared, but Carter feared that the transition could delay the release of the hostages. He remained at his desk until the last possible moment.
Usually on Inauguration Day, the resident staff would present a gift to the outgoing President and First Lady, but that didn't happen because of this Iran hostage situation. Everything that day was really chaotic.
But tradition requires that the outgoing president must leave the Oval Office and hand over the keys at the appointed hour, no matter what. and the motorcade is waiting. At 10 o'clock, the White House hosts a gathering of all the nation's top government officials before they head to the Capitol.
You have the entire leadership of the United States of America all in one location at the White House. The leadership from the Congress, and you have members of their cabinet and family.
A motorcade as many as 40 vehicles deep is lined up to carry them the 1.5-mile ride. The first cars start rolling out at 10:30 a.m. The car carrying both the president and the president-elect has to leave before 11:30 a.m. to make it to the Capitol on time.
As soon as that motorcade pulls out, the movers at the White House start.
The 93 permanent staffers descend immediately upon the first family's bedroom suites and living rooms and frantically start to pack.
The moment that car pulls off, it's so exciting, but you're still nervous. If you're too confident and you're too comfortable, that's when things don't go the way you expect.
They have less than 6 hours to flip the residence for the new first family, and there is no room for error. With 25 minutes until the start of a new presidency, America's incoming and outgoing presidents are both en route to the Capitol for the swearing-in, leaving a few short hours for the White House staff to flip America's most prestigious address.
It's like anyone's move-in, right? Except this is a little bit different. There's huge responsibility that's involved with setting up, a new government.
Think about the White House as an enormous multi-million-dollar company. That on one day, the CEO and all the senior officers, all of those people are leaving that company at the same moment.
It's a very nerve-wracking time because we're under the gun. I don't want to be the one that stands at the front door and says, Mr. President, we're not ready for you yet.
The moment that car pulls off, the carpets begin to get rolled up. The mattresses are taken out. The beds are broken down. There's a whole huge evolution that no one sees of 100+ people cleaning, packing, moving.
Of course, a job this big needs at least 6 months to prepare, which means starting long before the election. And that can be awkward.
If you put everything off until Election Day, you would not be in a position to start the conversations that need to be undertaken. Is a little bit delicate because when you have a one-term president, you don't know whether they're going to be there or not. The West Wing and the staff would not take kindly to the resident staff looking at information for a possible move-out.
When a president is seeking re-election, the last thing he wants to think about is having to move out of the White House.
I'll never forget a conversation I had with the president the morning of the election. The exit polls had us down -5. And he said to me, he says, gosh, you think we've been kidding ourselves? Could we really lose this thing?
The governor from Arkansas, Bill Clinton has won.
She was kind of stunned that he didn't get reelected. His approval rating was in the 90s at the beginning of that election year.
It's a very delicate circumstance, balancing the responsibility to the first family and then also looking forward to the change in administration.
When they left the White House, we were assembled in a state dining room, and President Bush totally lost it. Tears coming down, he couldn't say a word. So Mrs. Bush did the talking, thanking us for 4 wonderful years of service. When a president leaves, it's like losing a member of your family.
It is terribly traumatic on the last day to bid first family goodbye.
And it can be even more traumatic when the president's term ends unexpectedly.
The President of the United States.
Okay. Hey, you're better looking than I am. Why don't you stay here? Oh, you want a level, don't you? Yes, yes. Good evening. This is the 37th time I have spoken to you from this office, where so many decisions have been made that shape the history of our nation. Any more?
In 1974, when Richard Nixon's presidency was consumed by scandal, residential staffers like Betty Monkman were in a difficult spot.
I think a lot of the staff was really in denial. I remember meeting staff in the corridor and saying something about there might be a change, and no, there wouldn't be any change at all. It was a very stressful time. The house was extremely quiet, and we waited, like everyone in the country, to hear. And it wasn't until maybe a day or two beforehand that the usher's office called for packing boxes. And so we knew.
I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow. Vice President Ford will be sworn in as president at that hour in this office.
There was no prior planning, packing, and everything, so that all had to be done after they left.
I remember quite vividly, I was actually working that evening, and we drove Ford back to his home in Alexandria, Virginia, and there were 4,000 or 5,000 people around his home. The Secret Service had to quickly adapt to very stressful circumstances.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Vice President of the United States.
Mr. Vice President, are you prepared to take the oath of office as President of the United States?
I am, sir.
The next morning, he became the President of the United States, and no one's fully prepared, one day not to be the President and next day to be the President. But the Secret Service has to be prepared for it because, we can't afford to lose a president.
Gerald Ford's experience was the exception. Most presidents have a bit more time to ready themselves for life in the White House. An early November election day gives the incoming president 10 short weeks to get his West Wing team together with no time to rest.
The president-elect has come through a bruising campaign and has got to have a clear view of who he wants and what critical jobs. Oftentimes there's a fairly substantial delay and you don't get off on the right foot.
In 1993, President Clinton sprung a last-minute job offer on campaign advisor John Podesta.
I had worked for a long time on Capitol Hill, and I worked in the campaign in Little Rock, not thinking that I would myself go into the administration. About 2 weeks before the inauguration, I got a call out of the blue from Little Rock. 2 weeks later, I was standing in the White House on Inauguration Day.
Inauguration Day is not only a new president's first day on the job, it's the first day for all his staff, too. And they're all jockeying for position. Literally.
The Deputy Chief of Staff will be in this office.
The office space in the West Wing is not measured by square feet, it's measured by inches from the Oval Office.
Two of my friends who are veterans of Washington both separately asked me the same question, and I thought it was a totally ridiculous question. They asked me, where's your office going to be?
Sometimes the primest of prime real estate is actually tiny, but closer to the Oval.
Ladies and gentlemen, the next first family of the United States of America.
2 weeks after the election, the new first family gets a closer look at their new home, and the staff gets a closer look at them.
We need to learn a lot about the family. We try and get as much information as possible.
The incoming president and first lady have to decide how to decorate the White House residence and also answer some very important questions.
When we first came, we took a little bit of a tour. We've just got a great staff. They're just extraordinary people.
The information that you require is everything. What kind of beds do they sleep on? How do they want to use various rooms? How do they want to entertain? Where do they want furniture placed? What kind of toothpaste is used by the President and the First Lady? There's an unending string of questions that has to be asked.
Each first family can select furniture from the White House's collection, all of which is stored in a warehouse at a secret location.
We have about 40,000 square feet of museum-controlled storage. The collection itself, it covers a wide range of objects.
The First Lady and the President can walk through these warehouses, giant furniture stores, to pick from the chairs and the tables and to do what they want to do.
In addition to choosing whatever furnishings they want from the warehouse, Congress gives the first family $100,000 to spend on decorating. Anything extra, such as Nancy Reagan's infamous $200,000 China set, has to be covered by private donations. No matter what the decorating choices, there is no question it's a huge undertaking. And it all needs to be resolved in the next 8 weeks before Inauguration Day. At 5 minutes to 12, America is on the cusp of a new era. All the government officials have taken up their positions on the west steps of the Capitol, and the throngs are growing restless.
You hear thousands of cameras clicking, and all of a sudden you realize, okay, this is it.
Back at the West Wing, the final staff members of the outgoing presidency have already returned their key cards to security, while the residential staffers have begun to move the new president in. They will have until 5:30 p.m. to unpack and set up all of the first family's belongings, change carpets, paint walls, trade out furniture, and hang art hand-picked by the president. Every second counts.
You can't use old mattresses for the President of the United States. So we pull up carpet and change out furniture. So to try to pull all of that together gets you a little bit concerned, because in a few hours, the new family is going to come through the south portico doors for the first time.
And the White House staff can only make a first impression once. 12 noon exactly on January 20th. It's the moment that everything changes.
I, Dwight D. Eisenhower, do solemnly swear.
As the president takes the oath, there's always a lot more going on than meets the eye.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
And in 1981, when Ronald Reagan took office, what was happening behind the scenes was exceptionally dramatic. At 12 o'clock, as outgoing President Carter watched President Reagan take the oath, he still didn't know if the 52 Americans held hostage in Iran had been freed.
You have to be very careful as a presidential historian. You have to judge the presidency on what actually happens on their watch. There is that moment when they put their hand on the Bible and the power transfers.
It was just before dawn when two C-9 flying hospitals brought the 52 hostages to the U.S. military air base in Frankfurt.
The Iranians released the hostages just minutes after President Reagan was sworn in. It was a final act of spite against Jimmy Carter.
You are home, and believe me, you are welcome.
They credit Reagan with the release of the hostages, even though Carter did all that preparation and laid the foundation. Sometimes the president gets credit for things that happened due to a previous presidency. A lot of these issues are transitionary periods, and they don't always dovetail with the change in the presidency.
12 noon's a pivotal moment for the two presidents, and also for the staff back at the White House. It's only now that they can finally unload the belongings of the new first family to a staging area on the ground floor, while the housekeeping team upstairs rushes to clean every nook and cranny.
Folks really understand how much we need that 45 minutes.
It's the job of the chief usher to keep a watchful eye on his staff and on the time.
When the president took the oath, we were able to count down and say, okay, it's 12 o'clock. We have 5 more hours max to get this done. You can plan and plan and plan, but with all the different rooms, there's still organized chaos.
The top priority is the world's most powerful home office, the Oval Office. Every incoming president wants to make it his own.
One of the first things the presidents are concerned about is what the Oval Office is going to look like. What paintings will be on the wall, what busts will be in the room for sculpture, the kind of desk they're going to use.
The desk is the centerpiece of the Oval, and there are several to choose from.
There are other more utilitarian desks that are available. President H.W. Bush used one that was made in the 1920s, but a lot of them like the Resolute desk because of its long history and associations.
The famous Resolute desk was given to President Hayes in 1880 by Queen Victoria. It's been moved from the White House only once, after John Kennedy's assassination. Since then, it's been used by Presidents Reagan, Clinton, Bush, and Obama. Upstairs at the White House, progress has been made. New, clean carpets are being laid in multiple bedrooms on the second-floor residence, including the presidential suite.
As we say in the naval services, all hands on deck. Electricians, carpenters, and plumbers become movers on that day.
That's because no one outside the White House staff is permitted to handle the president's belongings. And sometimes these staff members might have to address an incoming president's unusual request.
Each family transforms the White House to their usage, but I can't think of anything as drastic as what was done for President Johnson in his famous shower. President Johnson wanted a very strong water source. They actually put additional pumps in, and my former boss, Rex Scouten, said, well, I want to check it out. So he put on a bathing suit and got in the shower, and the water pressure was so high that it pinned Rex Scouten against the wall.
And that was taken out, at the very beginning of the Nixon administration. I think he tried it once, and he said, remove it.
While the president is tucking into a celebratory lunch at the Capitol, the moving crew is frantically hauling the heaviest furniture upstairs for reassembly. Once the parade begins, it's the final countdown. Only a few hours left until the president arrives home. There are mountains of boxes left to unpack, and the White House staff will need to rely on an army of Secret Service agents to track the president's every step along the parade route. Time is running out. It's after the oath, after the luncheon. The new president of the United States and his family are on the move to their new home. Lined with well-wishers, the 1.7-mile parade route is all that separates the White House staff from their new leader.
During the parade, that's the time that you have to at least get their things in some kind of order. As you can imagine, that residential staff is moving. They've got, people unpacking, hanging pictures.
Upstairs, furniture is being rebuilt, and boxes are being organized room by room. The private residence includes 30-plus rooms, and each one must be transformed.
The chief usher is like a manager of a major hotel, but we only have one tenant. I have the staff that includes engineers, maintenance people, carpenters, plumbers, florists, but they're also capable handlers of antique furnishings. Nobody on inaugural day maintains their status. Everybody gets assigned a job, and it has to do with moving.
Also critical is the Secret Service detail assigned to protect the president inside the White House.
When you look at the White House, there are two fundamental groups, the staff and the agents. And those two groups really have to work together to make this transition work.
The residential staff and the White House Secret Service detail are the only two teams that will remain in this building regardless of who lives here.
The White House staff is getting the house organized, but it's not important without the Secret Service making sure that the president is safe and secure.
And we've been doing it since 1901. The transition is done so that on Inauguration Day, the new president is really surrounded by the Presidential Protective Division that had been with the former president.
For the former president, all the security people that you had relationships with and bonded with and had been all over the world, they stayed with the new president and as the former president with a whole new detail of people you don't know, and it happens very quickly.
Back in the weeks before the inaugural, a committee of elite security agents hashed out a plan to protect the new president along the parade route that leads back to the White House.
We have an entire squad that pretty much focuses 100% of its effort from about September of the inauguration. It's working 6-7 days a week, 13-hour days, going through every possible scenario.
These security personnel had an arsenal of technology at their disposal. In 2009, President Obama cruised home in a Cadillac, specially made just for him, with 5-inch thick armor plating, run-flat tires, and a sealed interior to protect against chemical attacks. Along the route, agents used air quality monitors to test floating dust particles for deadly pathogens.
For the 2009 inauguration, we had over 800 agents working that single inaugural day. Every single unit had a GPS tracker so that we could very quickly see where assets already were and move them to a crisis situation much faster.
And a fleet of surveillance drones protected the president-elect from potential threats in the sky.
It's not just a lateral threat anymore. We now have a vertical threat, whether that's an airplane or some sort of missile that could be fired. It creates a much more difficult environment for the Secret Service to operate safely in. The Secret Service would, of course, like to keep the president in the armored car for the entire inaugural parade.
But tradition holds that at a secretly pre-selected moment along the way, the first couple will get out and walk.
This is a historical event, and there's a pressure that the president be seen. The compromise is to have the president get out in certain places where the Secret Service can concentrate its efforts on the roofs and the windows and the buildings that surround that area. I think everybody accepts the fact that the president should not take unnecessary risks.
In 1977, President Jimmy Carter upped the ante for the Secret Service on his journey from the Capitol.
To show his sort of common man approach, President Carter walked the entire inaugural route. And that put a lot of pressure on the Secret Service, but we have to quickly adapt to a new president, and it's a big adjustment.
But it did slow down the parade. A fortunate turn for the frantic staff back at the White House.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
Before they can enter their new home, the President and the First Lady will watch the rest of the parade from a reviewing stand located on their own front lawn facing Pennsylvania Avenue. Just a few hours left until they can go inside.
When the President and the First Lady come to the viewing stand, we are in a different mode now.
With 2 hours to go, this is crunch time for the incoming events team at the White House. In 2009, Desiree Rogers, the new White House social secretary, found herself in an impossible situation.
People may not understand how difficult this work is. I found out pretty last minute that we were responsible for the reviewing stand. And at the same time, we were working on the move-in, and they were exactly at the same times. And so I had to be in two places at once. I phoned the person that I trust the most in the world, my mother, and I told her she was coming to Washington for a day to help me be in two places at once.
The inaugural parade is a tradition almost as old as the White House itself. But modern-day presidential homecomings are world-class spectacles that draw record crowds and carry a price tag north of $40 million.
Every president has his own style. I think you see that most dramatically on that very first day. President Kennedy's inaugural was very different than Eisenhower's.
The theme of the inaugural becomes sort of their vision of how they want to lead the country for the next 4 years.
For more than 6 decades, one family has been a silent force behind every presidential parade. Since 1949, their company, Hargrove, has produced the floats for the inaugural. But at that time, Earl Hargrove Jr. was a 20-year-old kid charged with herding Harry Truman's wayward livestock.
They sent up all these mules from Missouri, and we got up around 16th Street ready to make that turn. And the mules went to the left instead of to the right. And needless to say, that was a catastrophe right there in the middle of the street. And every inaugural, all the 16 that I've been involved with have always had catastrophes like that.
For the inauguration of President Carter, Hargrove built a float for the Grand Ole Opry, complete with a live rooster in pride of place. But live animals have always been unpredictable.
So the morning of the parade, we had this rooster, and we tied a little rope around his feet so in case he fell off. Well, he got spooked and took off and hung himself. It was quite a fiasco trying to get that daggone bird off that float when he was hung out dead.
As the sunlight fades from D.C.'s winter skies, the residence staff rushes to unpack the final boxes, fill up closets, and vacuum the new carpets.
Everyone was focused. Some things weren't done as quickly as I had hoped, but there's no way, even if it meant that I had to go and move a bed myself, that I would allow the new family to see that we weren't ready. The buck stops with me.
In the rush to finish the move-in of the president-elect, the staff can't forget the arrival of another VIP. The first family, Pat.
It's very important. The president and the new first family feel that they're at home from day one.
Where'd Millie? Let her in here. Oh, there she is.
In the Carter administration, I was to supervise bringing Amy's cat, Misty Malarkey Yin Yang, from Blair House, and I don't particularly care for cats. I have a memory of the cat absolutely jumping into my arms and clinging with its claws to my overcoat and carrying the cat over to the White House.
And it was just in time, because the president was on his way home. For the staffers inside, it's 0 hour. It's 5:30 p.m. The president walks up the pathway from the inaugural parade to the doors of the White House. After 6 hours of frantic activity inside, for the White House staff, this is the moment of truth.
It's almost like pins down. We're done. Mops are put away. Vacuum cleaners are away.
Everything is in place. Clothes hung up, sundry items in the bathrooms.
It was stressful. Everyone was focused on the last detail of having the right linen, the new toothbrush, and soap tissue. Everything is picture perfect. At that point, all I needed to do was to say, "Welcome home, Mr. President."
First step into the house that we'll be living in.
Out the field.
Wonderful.
The president and his family finally crossed the threshold of their new home. It's a custom-made White House, radically changed from a few hours ago.
Bedroom are ready, dining room are ready. They just have to move in and order what they would like to eat.
In the West Wing, rewiring still needs to be done, and phones and computers aren't yet set up. But some eager staff members have been there for hours anyway.
Might have been one of the first people back to the White House after the inauguration, and actually had a working day that afternoon.
Every single record, every document, every bit of information on a hard drive has been removed by the National Archives. Your desk is bare. In many offices, there isn't even a pencil or a piece of paper so that you could take a phone message.
In 2001, after the contentious Bush-Gore election dispute, certain members of the incoming Bush team reported a more curious absence from their offices.
It is true that a lot of people took the W keys off of the keyboard of their computers, which I personally think is funny.
There had been some pranks where folks had forwarded their phone from their desk to another office, and so it took some time to unscramble the phones.
According to Fox News contributor Karl Rove, the pranks went much further than the press reported at the time.
There was huge destruction. One of the offices, it looked like a bomb had gone off in it. They'd smashed the glass tops of the desk, they'd overturned file cabinets and thrown the material all across the floor, and broken equipment.
Members of the outgoing Clinton administration denied these accusations.
I think that was much ado about nothing, quite frankly. Did a few guys in the advance office take the W's off of their computer keyboards? Yeah, but that was pretty minimal.
Across the hall in the residence, it's nearly party time, but not for the staff.
Our job is not something that starts at noon on inaugural day and at 5 o'clock it's over and then we can all lay back.
We had a full house. The chefs are cooking, the butlers are shining the wine glasses.
There isn't even time for the staff to take a coffee break because there is a full evening of celebrations ahead.
They only have an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours to get showered and dressed and ready to go and before all the balls.
In 1993, the staff hit a major stumbling block when Hillary Clinton's ball gown went missing.
We assumed that in the process of moving that the gown was included, and evidently it wasn't. And there was a great deal of consternation on the part of the First Lady initially and a staff member trying to figure out where the ball gown was.
The Clintons were not happy. I understand there was some yelling involved.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States, Bill Clinton.
Eventually, it was found with the staff person's personal belongings.
Yes, unfortunately, sometimes people will make mistakes.
Well, Mrs. Nixon is wearing a mimosa yellow gown. It was designed especially for her, naturally, one of a kind.
By the end of an exhausting inauguration day, America's presidential handoff is complete.
The staff and myself probably did not sleep for 2 days. I had a sleeping bag in my office.
The residential staff and the West Wing staff can now begin to settle into a new era at the White House.
Somebody told me one time, how does the family adapt to the White House? And I said, well, your question's wrong. It's how does the White House adapt to the family?
And the White House is organic. It's moving, it's changing, it's a living thing.
Throughout the transition process, each White House staff member plays a role in protecting the Constitution of this country.
All the different staffs work together behind the scenes. And it is a smooth transition. And to me, that is very meaningful.
Our democratic process is what has kept our country together for over 230 years.
Every inauguration, the peaceful transfer of power is something that maybe we take for granted, but it's earned.
56 times we've had an inauguration, 44 have served as President of the United States, and we've done that peacefully. And I think as Americans, we can be very proud.
Every presidential transition, this unseen army battles the clock to ensure that the new president has everything he needs to immediately serve the country. It's a fight they can never afford to lose.